there's a lot of people in my generation who were like, man, in the old days it was better, right? But I'm like, yeah, but in the slightly older days it was worse. So.
Researching your interviews for half of the day.
Okay, well, that's very dedicated. I like that. I'm afraid I'm out of touch because I did a lot of press, obviously in the run up to the album, but it's been out for a little bit now, and I haven't really done any interviews for the last couple of weeks. So maybe I'm out of practice. Who knows?
Well, you had a lot of chances to practice, but you had a lot of courage to release the album during coronavirus, because many bands delayed it. Like Haken delayed their album by 2 months, I think. Steven Wilson canceled it until better times with his tours and stuff.
Yeah, it's been tricky. We have the same mastering engineer as those guys. It's been it's a weird decision for people to make, because on the one hand, nobody can tour, nobody can do the normal things they do to promote their albums. On the other hand, it's people are hungry for music all the time. I kind of feel like that doesn't really change. So whether or not you can do the normal kind of promotional stuff, or it's kind of a side point, I think, in a lot of ways, because the important thing is we had this album that was ready to go, and we went through the entire process of going through the release of it, and we needed to get it out. Like it was a real important thing for us to do. And I don't think that anything would have really changed that. I mean, maybe if, like, I don't know, streaming had died, that might be different, or something crazy had happened. But I think for us, it was like a process that was started way back in. In fact, I had a reminder recently. It was like 1 year since we tracked the drums. So it's a long process. It's not like a short, as you know yourself. So I think the process was already well underway by like January. We already had like singles coming out earlier in the year, and it just made sense to keep going. I can totally understand why people delayed. I think they were probably hoping that they could delay and then they'd be able to tour. But we kind of thought, what if that doesn't happen? What if there still is no touring in the autumn of 2020? And here we are in August, and it's not really changed that much for live music since March. So I think our decision was just to go ahead and see what happens, and kind of hope that the album would speak for itself and people would be able to enjoy it remotely. And I think that kind of has happened to an extent. Like, I don't think anybody has been like, well, if I can't see them live, I'm not going to listen to the record. Maybe we would have been able to reach some new fans that way. But it's who knows, man. It's just, we just play the hand we're dealt, right?
Yeah, well, when this whole stuff gets unfreezed, you'll still have bands who have to go on tour, and you would go on tour with them. So it's not like you're not racing against anyone, since everybody's in the same boat.
I think that's the first time that's ever happened, is that there's been a huge disadvantage, but it's across the world, and it's across the entire industry in that. So it's not like one company in one industry falling behind. It's like the entire live music industry has shut down, which, by the way, is awful. It's a terrible thing, and it's affected a lot of our friends. It's affected us. It's affected people we know and people we don't know in a really negative way. But nobody's had a choice. It's like everybody's been affected the same way. So if Metallica aren't touring, it doesn't matter if you're not touring. Do you know what I mean? Like nobody is touring. If you were like the one band that decided not to tour an album and everyone else did tour, it would be weird. But I think it's a very unique situation. I've never experienced anything like it. So I can't think of another time it's ever happened where it's literally affected everybody in exactly the same way. I tell you what's going to be interesting. There's going to be a race in 2021 to see like how quickly people can get going again, and how like arena touring is going to kick off again. That's going to be really crazy. I don't know how that's going to work. I hope it's going to be driven by science and sensible people, and then the rest will follow. And I really hope that there is still an industry that we know to exist, because frankly, I think there's been some gigantic changes in a lot of other industries that might be a similar thing where people just change the way they do stuff permanently. That's a possibility we have to understand. And maybe like doing live streaming of your concert is going to turn into something that is a viable option, and it never really was before in the same way. People will just be accepting of it. I don't know. It always happens that life decides and then technology catches up and then things happen. So I don't know really what the future is going to be like, but it is going to be different for sure. It already is.
Yeah, I like how you are very analytical in your answers.
I just think too much. That's the answer to that.
Good. You know, when I saw that your album is called Semaphore, I'm like, are those guys software developers or something?
I meant it more in. I think we're talking more about the messages rather than. Semaphore is obviously a coding term as well, but in coding it means. I think I'm right here. Does it mean something that you're? It's like a variable you're not sure of. I think.
No, not really. It's like a lock that synchronizes threads, so that when one thread goes into a section of code, another thread can't go there until the previous one is finished.
Oh, okay, that's kind of interesting. Maybe I was thinking of an asterisk. That's still really cool though. So we were just thinking about it in terms of sending messages, because it's the whole album is this science fiction kind of idea, and we were playing with the idea that when you create something, whatever it is, any piece of art, you are basically sending a message to other people, and they might experience it in a completely different time or a completely different place or in a completely different mood or whatever, but they're still going to have a vaguely similar experience to somebody who is on the other side of the world experiencing it at the same time. So it's this kind of almost telepathic communication that is really, I think, that is one of the most important things about art in general. And we wanted to come up with a way of kind of conveying that. So like the imagery on the front cover is like is a kind of graphical representation of like sending an idea out to somebody else and then receiving it, and then you kind of becoming intertwined with that person and the way they see the world and the way their mind works because you've shared that idea. But I'm aware that it has other connotations, and I didn't realize that was the specifics of the coding one. That's kind of cool. So it's like that has to happen. It's like a parameter that says this must happen before this other thing can happen, right? Which is kind of like an interesting idea in itself. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, you can use it as an answer for your future interviews, like, programming.
Planned from the beginning. That's cool, man. I mean, like, I think some people probably just like think of words and go, that's cool. But we've always tried to be extremely conscious of all the decisions we make in everything surrounding our music, and everything from the beginning of the first like riff to the end of the last piece of art design is we've controlled and done ourselves. So we really think about this kind of shit.
Yeah, because you painted all the stuff on your tablet, right?
Yeah, so I did the drawings for the covers. You've seen like the single covers and then the album artwork. I'm doing some t-shirt stuff as well. We've got some shirt designs that are already out, and there's some new ones coming. And then Dave, the bass player, did all the like digital layout. He's really good with the kind of design stuff. I'm like an artist, although I'm not really. I used to do a lot of art, and I kind of got back into it recently. But that's another thing. It's like if you've taken all this time to create something and record it and have your own recording studio to work in, and because obviously that's our business, that's our job, and you've been so controlling in everything about the music, it seems like it's just a natural thing to take it through. Because I don't know about you, but when I become interested in a piece of work by a band, I kind of want to absorb everything about it, and it's all really important to me. It's not just like the music. I remember this is probably like a lost art now, but I remember sitting reading like the CD liner notes and looking at all the lyrics and all the pictures and the artwork around it, and it would mean something to me. It was like I'd sit there with a pair of headphones on in the middle of the night listening to a like Mars Volta record or something, and it would be a whole experience, not just music. I think now I tend to put my headphones in and, you know, do my commute or something, and it's only like it's like a 2D experience in some ways, because I'm not sitting down and only listening to music. I think that's something that has changed. I don't know if it's better or worse, but it's definitely different as well.
I think I only had that once.
Okay.
There was this album by Alkaloid. It's the band composed of ex-Obscura members.
Mm-hmm.
And they did an album called The Malchus Grimoire, which was this very conceptual record with very nice arts, like they're all in covered in clay and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And at that time I was a poor high school student, and somehow I got so hyped that I actually ordered the CD and was there with all those booklets and stuff. But it was like only one impulsive decision.
I feel like I really miss the sensation of like waiting for a record to arrive in the mail, and like when it arrives you're like, this is this thing I have and I'm going to experience it as much as I can. I think partly that's to do with technology and society and the way we've changed, but I think it's also mostly to do with becoming older and having different responsibilities. I think that's the thing you can only really understand when you're like a teenager. That shit really means something, because it's an escape, right? It's like you have your normal actual life that you feel like you maybe didn't really decide to have. It's just there. And then you can choose that. You can choose which like album to buy with your like one bit of money you save for that one thing. And I feel like we live in a strange time where technology has decided the way things work. The demand has never really changed, but the way it's delivered to us for music has changed quite a lot, because technology has reached a point where it can supply things with like the greatest level of convenience we've ever experienced. But what's basically happened is there has been a brief period from like 1940, 1950, that kind of time, up to 2010, where it was viable to sell someone a physical recording of a piece of music. People forget now that it never happened before that. It didn't exist. Recording didn't exist, right? So in like the mid 1800s, there was no such thing as recording. You just experienced music in real time. That was the only way of experiencing. Or you could read sheet music. You could read like a recording of it that way, but you couldn't experience the sound of it without somebody being there and playing you something. So that was like that for all of human evolution. So for like, 50,000 years of intelligent human evolution, it didn't exist. And then, the ability to record happened, and then the kind of recording, the license to own a recording market happened, and it was a flash in the pan. It wasn't a long-term thing in terms of all humanity. It was a tiny little blip, and now we're past that. It's gone. It doesn't exist anymore. There are still legacies of it. You can still do it, but it's not really a thing anymore. And it's funny because I'm the generation I am, where I'm old enough to remember a time before computers, and I'm young enough to be really familiar with them as well. We've kind of seen, there's a lot of people in my generation who are like, man, in the old days it was better, right? But I'm like, yeah, but in the slightly older days it was worse. So there's like a time where if you were a musician, you were basically like a court jester, right? You were like a performer. You did your thing and people watched you, and hopefully they gave you some money. And then in like, I feel like the 80s, like the late 80s into the 90s, was the pinnacle of the physical recorded music kind of market, where people went, how much does it cost to record an album? And someone said $5 million, maybe, because we've got limos and jets and all that stuff, and studios are really expensive. And then the good news is you could make $100 million or $200 million from selling vinyl or selling CDs. I mean, imagine what the market did when they had a whole marketplace driven by vinyl, which is stupid. Vinyl is ridiculous. It's really fragile. It's not very good. Like, it's not very good at transporting. You have to make loads of compromises to make it work. It's very expensive to produce. And then they came up with the CD, and they were like, this isn't even a reproduction. It's the actual data. It's the noughts and ones, man. I've got it on the CD, and I can sell that, and I can produce them for $1, and I can sell them for 15. This is amazing. So they made crazy money, and then an entire industry was born out of that. Before I was even born, it was created during my really early years. It kind of reached its zenith, and now it's tailed out. It's burnt out. You can't make money from selling CDs anymore. You can't make money from selling vinyl anymore. You can probably make more money from selling vinyl than you can sell CDs. But music's not changed. The demand for music hasn't changed. The customer hasn't changed. The whole market has taken a huge hit in the way it's changed. But I don't know. It's funny because I see a lot of stuff at the moment about how streaming is killing music.
Spotify CEO. It was.
Yeah, right. And you know what? People are probably going to hate me for this, but I don't see what he's saying as a negative thing in itself. I think what it does is it reflects the way that society and technology has driven something beyond the control of the people who are involved in it. So what he's saying is not, I think you should do this. He might be saying that, but what he means is the market is dictating that is what will work. And that's a very different premise. And I think maybe it's bad, maybe it's a shame, in the same way that I don't get to sit there and read liner notes now. Maybe it's a shame that the market for, I can release an album every 4 or 5 years and that will be fine. Maybe it's bad, but he's talking like facts. Like, it just is that way. I don't know. I still love albums. My favorite format is the album format. I don't enjoy EPs. I don't enjoy singles, but that's just me. I can't deny that there's a huge market for people who just want a playlist that updates every couple of weeks and they get a new thing. That's fine. That's just the way it works. And if you're like 17 right now, I don't know about how your your life works in terms of being interested in music. It's not the same as it was for me when I was 17, but that doesn't mean that I think it's wrong. I don't know. Anyway, that's a mini rant, but forget it.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. It was actually the first question on my list. What's your opinion on the situation? Because there's a lot of hatred on social media from a lot of musicians on like the phrase that you have to release an album more often than once every 4 years, and you guys released albums every 2 years, which is very productive.
We have a couple of advantages, like the fact that we built an entire recording studio just to do that. But,
exactly.
Well, you know what? It's the stupidest way. I mean, it's interesting because I think you could have probably stopped your sentence at "there is a lot of hate on social media." Because I think the real problem is it's never the facts. The facts of any argument are really irrelevant. What happens is people have emotions and they feel super able to be vindicated by talking about those emotional reactions and have those opinions. And I think what's happened is that you get natural backlashes to stuff all the time. B, you get content which is designed to produce that backlash. Because if I was the CEO of Spotify, and I don't think I would bother saying something that wasn't slightly controversial, because controversy breeds engagement, and they're part of social media too. Spotify are a social media platform. They understand about engagement. I think the reality is a lot of people who are hurting right now are hurting because they were really well established in an industry that has changed a lot. And in a way, it's moved quicker than they could. But also, there's a huge thing here that's not being said by a lot of people, which is, okay, so people are accusing Spotify of not paying out enough money to artists, okay? But actually, I think what's happening in a far bigger way is that Spotify is able to, the way it worked was to leverage the catalogs of lots of major labels by giving them shares. And the labels are the people that have not paid the artists. We should make that kind of clear. Like, I'm talking the majors, I'm talking major labels with pop artists. A lot of that hatred is built around that. And it's not the way, so our label, for example, which is Long Branch, who are part of SBV in Germany, are the most amazing bunch of people I could ever hope to work with. They understand what we do. They want other people to hear it, and they're just excited. They're like in the band. Do you know what I mean? They're like that riff is sick. You know, they're that guy, and that's not the same thing at all. The hand that we're all dealt is to deal with streaming and trying to find ways of making revenue from our music. And admittedly, streaming has completely changed the way revenue generation happens with music. But the old school argument that I used to be able to sell a CD for like £12, and now I can only sell one stream for half a penny. Those two things are not the same thing. They're not the same thing.
Yep, you can play a CD multiple times.
It's just it's more like radio, right? So if you get played on radio one time, then like maybe 10 million people might be listening on like Radio 1 or something in the UK. And it's not the same as one stream. It's the same as like 10 million streams. You know what I mean? So I feel both sides of this argument because I'm very much involved in both sides of this. But I think there's a lot of people who are like, really what they're doing is feeling angry that they're not successful, and they're feeling angry that it's really hard to make money from music. And they're right, because it is. But I'm not sure if being like having a terrible label deal in 1985 or being independent and having to deal with the current situation, I'm not sure if they're that different. There's always like a few people who make it huge, and there's a lot of people in the middle who have a really hard graft every day of their life. But the good news is they're playing music every day, so they're cool with it. And I don't think the two are ever really comparable. It's like a tiered system. What matters is that you are creating something that people want. So at some level, if you create good stuff that people want, you will be rewarded for that. No matter what the industry is doing. It's always been the case. You just have to be constantly trying to grow and become more and more astute about how the industry works so you can take advantage of it to the best of your ability. And you can't rely on a system that used to work 20 years ago. It just doesn't. That is gone. There's no point in going, I wish it was like that now, because it isn't. It's like saying I'm a blacksmith and I don't get any money for making horseshoes anymore. Fuck that. And it's like, I could have seen that coming. I don't know. But I also don't want to sound like I don't understand it, because it's an incredibly frustrating and difficult thing to create something that takes you maybe 2 or 3 years of your life, and then it just doesn't do anything. Like that's horrible. I've experienced that loads of times. So I can definitely see both sides of that argument. I do wonder if, like, for example, our first album that we put out ourselves, we weren't ready for a label to commit to being on board with our project yet. So putting it out ourselves was the only way to do that. So there's no other version where that would have worked. We wouldn't have got signed in 2000, and we wouldn't have got signed in 1990. It doesn't make any difference. We just weren't far enough along our own trajectory to be a proven thing for a label to be on board with. So it's kind of, there's no point in worrying about it in a lot of ways.
Yep, something you can't control.
Yeah, exactly. It's a very complicated thing.
You know, it got me thinking about which new bands I really fell in love with during the last year, and it seems like it's less and less. But when I think like Caligula's Horse, do you know them?
Yeah.
So they put out an album this year, which is, in my opinion, fantastic. And I listened to the song Autumn, and I absolutely love it. But when I listen to the melody, it's not really something very unique and new. It's like a simple scale. It's been done before. Why does it? Why do I like it so much? So I'm just wondering what makes this, what makes songs and albums really work and engages people.
I've been thinking about that a lot as well, because it's very difficult when you make records full time and you make records for a lot of other people as well. It's very hard to put your finger on exactly what it is that will make someone engage with something. And I think the answer is you're probably connecting with their original enjoyment of it themselves, which sounds like a slightly airy way of putting it. But you know, when you listen to a record and you can sense that the band are doing something they believe in and that they are enjoying making that, and it means something to them. And I don't even know if you would consciously think this, it might be a subconscious thing, but I feel like it's always really obvious when something's been made by people that believed in it when they were doing it. And they didn't just go, oh, I suppose we have to have 10 songs, we better write a couple more. You know what I mean? Like, I think people can smell that coming a mile off. So I feel like there's no like rules to this, because it can be different for every person. But I think when people engage with something heavily, it's probably because it speaks to them on a subconscious level. And I would be surprised if that wasn't because the people that made it were just doing what they wanted to do, and it's raw and it works and it's connected. Because I'm a producer, I have to think about this stuff a lot, and it's very hard to advise someone. You can't be like, here's the 10 things you must do to make a hit record. It doesn't work like that. But what does work is if you're authentic and you genuinely believe to the point where you forget what you're doing, if you believe in it, then other people will tend to engage with it as well. I think that's about the best advice you can get. So maybe that's just a freak thing where they just liked it and they meant it, and then that engaged with you. Or maybe it's not even that complicated. It might just be that like it's kind of cool, or it reminds you of something else that you love, or you were listening to it in a good mood first time you heard it. I mean, it can be anything, right? It's a very, very fucking crazy subject.
Yeah, I think it may also be repetition, because I found out about this band like 5 years ago. Then they released another album which I liked, and now when they release something, I'm less judging of it.
Right.
And I want myself to like it, because yes, you have to be authentic, but I think that most musicians are. I don't know, you are a producer, so you probably work with a lot of new artists. And do you actually have to work with a lot of bands who are inauthentic and don't do the music they love and feel?
I wouldn't call it being, in that case, it's less often inauthentic and more often inexperienced. So people feel like they're doing what they want to do, but they haven't, because music is like a fucking spiritual awakening, right? It's like a big deal to go through something and actually really go, oh wait, this defines me as a person, right? That's not a small thing. That's not something that you can do on your first try. That takes a lot of effort, and it takes a lot of experience. So I would definitely say that I've worked with lots of people who are at the beginning of their journey through understanding what that is. And that journey might end up being not what they thought. And maybe they start off going, this is going to be fantastic. I know, you know about the like, I think it's a Dunning-Kruger curve, where at the beginning of an experience, you don't know how much you don't know. And then you go over the tip and you suddenly see down the other side how inexperienced you are. And then you have to hit the bottom and go all the way back up again till you're like a master of your craft. And the vast majority of people are on the way up that first kind of curve upwards. When you go over the top, it can really make you feel like you want to quit. Like you suddenly realize, I don't know anything about anything. So people like, okay, so like Prince would have been way up here at the top of the curve up again. And to get to that level takes an awful lot of effort. And I feel like a lot of people, it's not so much about saying you're being inauthentic. It's more like saying you haven't got the toolkit to learn how to really listen to what it is that is authentic for you. Do you see what I mean? It's never as simple, because no one's ever, in music, very rarely are people deliberately inauthentic. That doesn't usually happen, because why would you do that? Why would you be like, it's like Milli Vanilli or something. It's like, I'm going to pretend to be something I'm not. That's rare. But often, I mean, how many people do you know that are really sure of what they mean in the world and what defines them as a person without music being involved, just as a person? It's a hard thing to know, right? And music is a tool to help you accomplish that. It's something you do along that path. And it can be a really good catharsis. It can be a really good way to find that out. But it's very normal. Like, it's like looking at yourself when you were like 17, when you felt like you knew what you were doing. And when you're like 27, you go, I did not know what I was doing. Right? And it's not because at 17 I was being inauthentic. It's because at 17 I was just like still copying other things and still trying to work out what the fuck I wanted to be. I feel like, in fact, as a band, I would say that this record is the first time we've really felt like we do know what we're doing. Because we're all old as shit, and it takes a lot of time. It takes several records sometimes, and there's definitely, you can see a trajectory through the albums that we've released. But on this one, we were like, oh no, we get it now, from the beginning to the end of the process. We understand it, and I'm sure we'll look back on it in a few years and go back to thinking that we didn't know what we were doing. But right now, it feels pretty good.
Do you know what are the exact things that changed in how you approach your music and what you do differently? Like, if you were to speak with Paul from 2016 and say, don't write it like that, don't record it like that, it's not the song you want to release.
Fuck, on a technical level, yeah, of course I do. I could write it all down. But I don't think that's really important, because the technical stuff is, it's not really the point. I think the artistic stuff is really the point. We were all in a band together. So the three of us in BOE were in a band before that called Cape Fear. And we were playing the kind of music that we thought people might like. That's what you do, right? And there was a friend of ours who sat in some rehearsals, and he was trying to give us some advice. He's a really good guy called James. And he said, like, why are you doing what you think is right instead of just doing what you want to do? And we were like, I don't know. I've never thought about that before. But we made a conscious decision to throw everything we had away and start a whole new project on the basis that we were pretending without realizing. And then when we all started to be driven purely by not what we thought would work, but what we liked, what we just wanted to do, it all started to make a lot more sense. That process was only the beginning of learning how to do that, because it's still very hard to know. But that was the biggest turning point for all of us, was just before the current band was created. And it was just letting ourselves off the hook and being like, it doesn't matter if anyone else likes it. What matters is if we like it. And then maybe other people will like it. Who knows? But yeah, that's the way that went. And since then, well, one thing that changed on Semaphore is that instead of all playing together in rehearsal space, we kind of wrote and recorded as we went. So I might have an idea for a riff, but after our session for the day had finished, I would just, start jamming something, and it would be me and Dave and Billy all in the room together in the control room and programming drums and like putting parts down, putting riffs down, and then running into the other room doing a vocal. And so it wasn't like jamming, but it wasn't one person doing it and then telling everyone else what's going to happen. It was completely collaborative, but in a way we'd never done it before. So that's very interesting, because what that allows you to do is stop listening to what you're playing and start listening to what the song sounds like. Do you see what I mean? So for a drummer especially, I know for Billy, if he's like, okay, that's a cool guitar riff, I'm going to try and, on the spot, I'm going to try and learn the polyrhythm that you're doing and jam. You can't like jam because you don't know it yet. So if we're all in the room and he's like, oh, I've got this idea, and I'm like, cool, I put that on a MIDI keyboard and like program some drums, and then I can put a guitar down, deck with bass. If we can do it that way, it makes a lot more sense. And that's how all the ideas of Semaphore were born. And to the point where we finished entire demos just with like MIDI drums, and a lot of them have not changed. In fact, I only re-recorded 3 songs of vocals. The rest of them are all like the demo vocals that we did drunk on like Thursday nights, because that was our night of hanging out as a band for several weeks. And because we were having fun, in fact, this is the same point. We were having fun and we were doing cool shit that we enjoyed doing. And because of that, it sounds cool and it works. And I tried to re-sing the songs.
It's impossible.
You can't do it. I was like, okay, this is technically right, but it is not as good. And in fact, it was actually Billy who was like, what the hell are you doing? Like, why are you re-recording this? And I said, I don't know. I just assumed I had to re-record it because it's, you know, it's just a demo. And he was like, but it's good. So yeah, and he was pretty pissed off because we just nearly killed him doing the drum tracking because he had to re-record drums, and he did it in like 4 or 5 days and nearly killed him. It was crazy hard, but it sounds amazing, and it's obviously so worth doing. And he was just like, okay, I've done my bit now. And then I was like, I don't think, you know, should I bother singing them again? No, he was the one that suggested it. Otherwise, I would definitely have redone it. Like I said, I tried, but it just didn't pan out. It didn't sound as cool.
Yeah, I know the feeling. I remember in one interview, Steven Wilson mentioned that he always records with very good equipment when it comes to his demos, because he knows that probably the emotion is not going to be there when he decides to re-record it.
Yeah, and because of the way we were doing this record, where it's a concept album, and all of the lyrical stuff is there's like a narrative for each song, it meant that everyone was involved in that process. So we'd be sitting in a room, and Dave might be like, "Oh, we should make this song about like an android that doesn't know it's an android," right? And then that would mean everyone could throw in lyrics. So I'd be like, "Oh, that's great. Yeah, let's do that." We would write the lyric, and then I'd run next door and record the verse, and we'd come back and have a listen and be like, yeah, that's cool. So it wasn't like I knew the song and I had to sing the song. I just sang little bits. But in a weird kind of way, it was so instant and so connected that it had, like you say, it's got energy to it. I'm not sitting there thinking, because, okay, so singing is a weird thing anyway. You're trying to basically hack your brain the whole time, as you know. And I wasn't ever thinking, am I going to be able to, you know, do I have the stamina for this day? Can I like kill that high note? Can I do whatever? I was just having fun, right? and what it sounds like is somebody just performing. But I think once I came back and thought I must get this correct, it took all the fun away. So I think that's why it works. But yeah, it's a very good point. Record your demos like you mean it, because you never know. You might fuck up later.
Yeah, I once had an idea for a line in my song somewhere in the end, and I came home. I was sick,
right?
And I recorded with, you know, like this, and then I listened to it like 100 times by now, and I kind of like how it sounds, and I'm gonna have trouble re-recording it because it's got some character.
Beware of demoitis as well, because that's the other thing. You know, when you fall in love with a demo, and if a stranger heard it, they'd be like, "This is obviously a demo." but because you're really familiar with, you go to love it. That's kind of, the stupid thing is, human perception is incredibly good at habituating to what's happening around you. So the phrase I always say to people is like, when you're in like a festival and there's like 60,000 people there, we have to remember that because it's not been very recently. And then you hear your friend talking and you recognize your friend's voice, even though there's like 60,000 people there, right? That's because your brain can laser in on shit like that. So when you sit there going, I'm going to listen to the hi-hats now, and you listen to the hi-hat and you start to get all these crazy ideas about the hi-hat. You're like, I need to EQ it. The transients are wrong. I'm going to have to like carve some of the attack off. This is insane. No, everyone's going to hate this record unless this fucking hi-hat is right. And then you come back to the rest and you're like, I fixed it, guys. I fixed the hi-hat. And then you listen to it and you're like, the hi-hat is too loud. Because what you've been doing is listening just to that one thing. And then the next day you're like, what on earth was I even thinking? What was I worried about? This sounds fine. But because your brain is so clever at targeting one thing. So like that phrase you're talking about has probably been in your brain the whole time because you knew that you knew it wasn't good because you were sick and all that stuff. So now when you listen to the song, you have all this sense memory of you recording it, and you have like the fact that you've kind of fallen in love with it as this like ugly duckling of the song. So you're not listening to it with any kind of objectivity at all anymore. You're only hearing the way you remember it sounding. And someone else might be like, I don't hear you have a cold. What are you talking about? Or they might be like, that sounds awful. You just don't know. Like it's so funny how the human brain is such a powerful tool like that, and it's never reliable.
Gotta have producers.
You gotta have producers, unless you're in our band where all three of you are producers, and it really fucking shouldn't work, but it does somehow. I don't know how. It's ridiculous. It's the worst way ever to run a band.
By the way, you mentioned in one of your interviews that I think for your second album, somebody from the label would suggest you changes and you would have to settle on a compromise. So how does that work exactly? Like which artistic decisions does your label influence?
I actually don't think that's ever happened. I think the only time that may have happened is maybe if they're suggesting like a radio edit or something, which is fair enough because a lot of the time what happens is somebody outside the band suggests it and we go, oh shit, that's actually better. That's the way it should be anyway. That happened with My Favorite Stranger from Eugen, which is one of the singles from that record. Is there were some suggested cuts, and actually the way it is on the like radio edit is probably better. So this is being stupid. Honestly, Long Branch, it's Manuel over at Long Branch and Flo originally. He's moved on now. Just crazy supportive, and they signed us from our demos for Eugen. So they were just like, yeah, this sounds cool, just like make the record now. And Semaphore, we did all the demos and they were like, this is great. And then we sent them the masters, they're like, this is better. That's fine. We actually haven't had a single thing like that on anything. And I'm really grateful because I've worked with lots of projects where there has been lots of suggestions and other stuff going on. I think the difference is they didn't sign our band because they wanted a different band. They signed our band because they liked the sound of what we did and they thought that other people would too. So all they've ever done is support us, which I'm incredibly grateful for. And the one thing I'd say though on that point, because I think it's valuable, if somebody is giving you artistic feedback like that, there's only two situations that can possibly be happening. One is they are super insecure about their own position and they really want to have some input because they feel like, they need to have some artistic input to validate themselves somehow, which is clearly bullshit. Or, and it's probably more likely, they actually know what they're talking about. They know the industry, they know what will work, and maybe there's some value in it. And when I'm producing other people and somebody gives me mix notes, my first gut instinct is always like, this is so stupid. And then I actually listen and I'm like, oh, they're actually right. They have a point here. And usually what happens is it's like objectivity. Somebody will hear something you could never hear. And maybe they're not, maybe it's too big, like they're saying, it would be great if you sounded a bit more like this whole other band. But maybe what they actually mean is that one hook could be stronger. Do you know what I mean? You have to kind of filter through what's actually coming out. I mean, music is a really weird thing to talk about at the best of times because the language isn't really there. That's why we end up talking about things seeming muddy or like the brown sound or like, what does it even mean? None of it means anything. If someone says it's too present, does that mean too toppy, too forward, too compressed? There's so many different options. So I think it can be really confusing and lost in translation a lot of times. But we have to remember that there are people their whole job is to sell art, not make it, but sell it. And sometimes they might have some value to people who make it because they might be able to say to them, have you considered this whole other thing? And it might be useful. But at the same time, fuck them. Just do what you want to do. Somewhere in the middle of that.
Let me ask you, you've played a lot of shows.
Yeah.
Has the way you experience shows changed since you started to tour?
That's really interesting. I think a better question was, how many shows have you had time to go to? Do you mean like other people's or experienced our own?
No, I mean your own.
Okay. Well, that makes more sense because fuck me. I haven't been to anyone else's shows hardly. The way I experienced shows early on was like a weird out-of-body experience that I couldn't really get a hold of and just happened. And then I was like afterwards, oh yeah, we played a show. I can't even remember it. But that's just because, when you first start off, when you're younger and less experienced, it's nerve-wracking and there's a lot going on and it's kind of crazy, and high pressure kind of big shows can still feel like that now. But most of the time now I'm much better at being mindful of what's happening right now and kind of being present in the moment. The way I experience shows is I try and find a kind of happy medium between being on autopilot, because to be honest, to play our music, and especially for me when I'm playing guitar and singing a lot, one of those things has to be automatic, and I try and make it the guitar because I need to concentrate on singing. So to be able to do that, obviously there's a certain amount of automation, but trying to balance that between I guess just being aware of what's going on and being present. And really, I think a big thing that I feel like you can train for is noticing when your mind is drifting and consciously bringing it back. I guess it's like a yoga thing. It's like meditation, right? Where that's probably a good idea. Everyone should become like a meditation expert. But when you're playing live, if you can sense that you're drifting and you're thinking about things that aren't relevant right now, like, oh, wait, did I leave the van unlocked? That seriously happens. You start drifting, and then you go, wait, I'm the one playing this show. I have to concentrate. I find myself wandering and then bring myself back. All three of us have talked to each other about this, and we definitely do it. The other thing we started doing is like rating our own performances in our heads, and then like after the show, comparing notes. So I'd say to Billy, you had like a 95 on that show, and he'd be like, I thought it was like a 76. Then we'd start like comparing how well we think we did, because a lot of the time when you make a mistake, you don't hear it, but everybody else does. But yeah, I think it's weird when you play like quite technical music. You have this weird mixture between pure passion and energy, and having to stay quite machine-like and organized and technical as well. And if you lose sight of either one of those, it's not a good thing. We all play to a metronome. We don't have any triggers or backing tracks. It's just that we all have the metronome in our ears to keep in time. So that kind of helps, because you've got this constant reminder if you're drifting. But I think trying to make the experience of playing more conscious. Is basically that's how I define it. So not just a automatic experience you have any control over, but actually like a conscious decision that you're kind of really present in all the time. So I think that's the main way it's changed for us.
Well, I think that whenever I would start to consciously think about what I'm performing, I would immediately fuck up.
Yep, that's the one. But at the same time, you have to be able to look into the crowd and react, and you have to be you can't be completely not there. So yeah, there's a really difficult medium, and the worst thing you can do is start thinking about how difficult what you're doing is. Like it must be like that for people who are doing like high level sport. Like imagine running towards a high jump and thinking that is a high jump. How is it possible to get over that? And nobody thinks like that. They just run and their muscles do the rest, right? It's just muscle memory. So, but yeah, I know for a fact Billy has this a lot because it's like complete limb independence. And if he ever starts to think, wow, look at my foot, then he's in trouble. He's in big trouble. And me and Dave will always know if that happens. We'll just turn around and be like, oh, come on. Except he's got his eyes closed, so he can't.
Yeah, like going to the gym and standing with a barbell thinking that's heavy.
Yeah, never do that. Like, just have a go. But yeah, it's just experience, man. That's all it ever is. That's all it ever is.
What about enjoyment? Has the enjoyment part of performing changed with time?
Yeah, the more conscious I am of it, and the more prepared I am, the more experienced I am, the more I enjoy it. But sometimes with really big shows, it's very hard to enjoy because it's very stressful. So, for example, two of them within the last couple of years, one was playing Brixton Academy with Skunk Anansie, which was sold out, and it's like 5,000 people. And we had maybe 3 minutes to get on stage and sound check because everything was running late, blah, 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 as it always does. So that show was over before I even knew what was happening. That was a stressful one. And Download Festival in 2018, all of our in-ear monitoring, somebody switched on like a security radio or something, and it cut, not all three of us, it only cut Dave and Billy's monitoring. We were on wireless monitoring. So I was playing the song thinking, I don't feel like these guys are in the same, they cannot hear what I'm doing. So, and that was halfway through the set. So the first half was fine, and the second half was like, I don't know, it was horrendous. It was a horrible experience. I think it came across okay because we just sort of got on with it, but it didn't feel fun at all. But some of the little like 100 capacity shows where you're going crazy and it's really sweaty, they can be the most fun thing in the world, you know? So it just depends. I think it's definitely, you would imagine from the outside that like the bigger the show, the more fun it is. I don't think it's like that. I think it's the more relaxed you are, the more fun it is, basically. But yeah, no, I definitely enjoy it more than I ever used to, for sure.
Awesome. Well, one point I heard recently is that some people enjoy big shows less because they feel less connection with the audience. Like if it's a small club.
Yeah, I can imagine that for sure. It's also, I think it's that, and it's a bit more pressure. You know what I mean? Like it's not natural. None of it's natural anyway. But you can feel very remote. I think. Imagine being like in an arena tour the size of like Metallica or something crazy like that, and you're just doing. You have like, it's like a theater show. You have like your mark for the lighting, and you stay there, and it's all choreographed, and that must be strange. It's not the same as playing a sweaty club. That's for sure. But I guess you just experience it in a different way. And as long as you're present and mindful in that experience, it's probably rewarding in its own way.